Good evening and welcome to our Headliners Virtual Showcase. Thank you so much for choosing to join us this evening to hear a little bit more about some of the books we've got coming up in early 2024. I'm Joe here from Headline Publishing Group, and I'm thrilled to be introducing you to the selection we have this evening. So whether you're after the hot new debut you need to be keeping an eye out for, or want to hear more about the next book from some of your favourite authors, we'll have you covered here this evening. We'd love to hear what you think, so do please follow along the conversation both here in the Zoom chat and also on social media. We'll be using hashtag headliners on both Twitter and Instagram, and you can tag us at HeadlinePG on Twitter or at Headline Books on Instagram. And we can't wait to hear what you think. We'll also have all of our authors' social media handles on the screen throughout the evening, so do please follow them and join them in the conversation too. On our social media, we'll also be having some opportunities to win a brilliant goodie box of proofs and edible goodness from this evening. So do keep an eye on our social media channels for that. All you need to do is show us your shelfies. We want to see your amazing organisation, your colour coding. How do you sort your shelves? We want to see it all. So do tag us there with the shelf you're the most proud of, and we'll randomly pick a couple of winners to receive boxes in the next week or so. But enough from me. Who better to introduce you to some of the amazing upcoming books we've got than the authors themselves? So without further ado, let's hand it over to them to start you on our 2024 reading journey.
Hi, I'm Ellie Friedman from Tinter Press, and I'm really pleased to introduce you to two of our wonderful authors who have books coming out next year. So we've got Amy Twigg with her debut novel, Spoilt Creatures, and Francesca Rees with her second novel, Glass Houses. So I'd love if you could each start us off by telling us about your book in 2 or 3 sentences. I thought, could we start with you, Francesca?
Okay, so hello, Ellie. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Glass Houses is essentially a love story, but it kind of uses the old trope of the sort of hackneyed heterosexual love story as a prism to talk about a lot of other things like Welsh identity, politics, class issues, urban-rural divide, second home ownership, masculinity. It is essentially the story of a guy called Gethin, who is a forestry worker who's being automated out of a job, and his relationship with his childhood sweetheart, Olwen. And it brings in a sort of like 80s backstory as well, when second homes were being burnt down in rural Wales. And all these kind of elements sort of come together over this one tense summer where a lot of drama happens and lots of simmering tensions kind of all come to the fore. And I mean, love story, you know the deal. So that is Glass Houses.
And Amy?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Spoilt Creatures follows the story of Iris, whose life has become very stagnated. She's living with her mother after a breakup, working a dead-end job. And then things change when she meets Hazel, who lives at a remote women's commune. Iris soon finds herself drawn into this heady world of possibility and freedom, seizing on new experiences and hidden desires. And then a group of men arrive on the farm, resulting in the commune's existence being thrown into question and culminating in an act of devastating violence.
Good stuff.
So it's a cheery.
It's a cheery. Yeah. So both of your novels, I thought that the setting and the sense of place, they're both so key to the story. And I thought it was also really interesting that you both chose more isolated settings, like whether that be kind of small town or somewhere very rural. I thought, could you tell us a bit about how you decided on and created the settings, starting with you, Amy?
Yeah, so the women's commune is set in Kent, where I grew up. And I've always found the land there to be quite strange. There's a prominent history of witchcraft in my hometown, and I suppose, whether intentionally or not, I started writing Kent into the story. It just felt like the right place to put these women. And the majority of the story takes place in 2008, which was partly to limit the technology at the time. but also I was still a teenager in 2008, and a lot of the women's power struggles and anger reminded me of my own upbringing in Kent and my days of being in school in that setting, and it felt like the right way to tell that story.
How about you, Francesca?
So similarly to Amy, I also set the book in the place where I grew up, which is very rural North Wales. I knew I always wanted to write about rural North Wales. I think it's a part of the British Isles that is very easily forgotten. People know nothing about Wales, really. And I find it a fascinating place. I really wanted to get this particularity of these small rural Welsh communities, because I feel like rural Wales, especially rural North Wales, is very different to England. There's a lot of specificity going on that's connected to the Welsh language, to sort of like Welsh culture, Welsh history, Welsh folklore, the tense relationship between the Welsh and the English oppressors, for want of a better expression, or maybe not for want of a better expression. And I also knew, in terms of the location, I wanted it to be very much a book that's rooted in the woods. My father was a forestry worker. Geth is the main character, is also a forestry worker. So I really wanted to get that kind of like, I wanted the whole book to smell like wet trees, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I really wanted to like, I was so bored of, ever since I moved to England as an 18-year-old, listening to people being like, oh, Wales, yeah, I did my Duke of Edinburgh there. Like, it's really nice. It's like gorgeous. I just wanted to like actually show what it's like, for the good bits and the bad bit, the good bits and the bad bits, as much rural idyll as there is social deprivation and all these kind of weird idiosyncrasies. So yeah, that's why the book is in Wales.
I think that is a really good description of, was it damp earth, that sort of smell of it. I could take, yeah. And both of your novels, they also focus on characters. I think something that stood out to me was that they're at real turning points, and they ultimately choose to run away from their normal life. And I would love if you could tell us a bit about how you created these characters and kind of plotted out or decided what their journey was going to be. Francesca, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I've talked a lot about Gethin, who is the main character, but obviously there is, there is a love interest. It's a love story. It takes two to tango. And Olwen is another kind of trope that you get in the kind of place where I grew up. There was a big influx of essentially upper middle class bohemian hippies, like potters, weavers, landscape painters, who came to rural Wales in the sort of 70s, 80s. And Olwen is the daughter of this kind of family. So that's sort of where she came from. She's therefore got this uneasy uneasy relationship with the place that she grew up, because she is once part of it, but also kind of removed from it. Whereas Geth has almost sprung from the soil. He's so racinated in this place. All his ancestors are from there. He's from like good Welsh farming stock. And he was really the first. I had a really clear image. The book opens with him waking up in a very specific location, and that was the first image that came to me. To be honest, it sounds really like trite to say, he came to me kind of like fully formed. Obviously it took a lot of work, but like I felt like I knew this man so well. He's drawn from different components of him, are drawn from people that I grew up with, people that I know. So yeah, and I was interested in exploring these kind of people who have, it's really, I don't want to romanticize it and be like people who've got left behind in these communities, because they haven't. And I think that's a really patronizing urban lens to look at it. Like, he hasn't been left behind. He has a life, but it is kind of, it's threatened by kind of these outside forces. So I really wanted to go into that and explore that. So yeah, that's Geth and Olwen, the main characters.
Amy, how about you?
Well, it's interesting because I first started writing Spoilt Creatures in 2020 during lockdown. So I think a lot of the main character, Iris's desire to escape her current situation, circumstances, really sprang from my own desire to escape from the house that I was suddenly trapped inside of, as a lot of us were. So I think there was like there was definitely a correlation between the characters in the story and the writer, myself, just trying to break out of something. But I also had a serious desire to write a story that sort of created what is initially a safe space for women. And I think it's that very much just come from a time when it's very difficult to be a woman. It's difficult to have a safe space of our own in a time when sort of trans women are being persecuted and our autonomous rights are being, stripped away from us. So I found myself really wanting to write about the possibility of that safe space, whether it can really exist, and whether it can remain a safe space, really.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. Both books are out next summer. So yeah, we really look forward to, I'm sure everyone really looks forward to reading them. They are both just brilliant, and I'm so proud to publish them. So, and to work with both of you.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Damman from Headline, and I'm delighted to be here with two extremely talented writers, Ashley Tate and Ashley Elston. Ashley's, hello.
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 For the sake of clarity, I think I'll just refer to you both by your full names, if that's okay.
Yep.
But anyway, there's clearly something in the name, because both these authors have written two phenomenal debut thrillers, 27 Minutes from Ashley Tate and First Lie Wins from Ashley Elston. And I'd love to kick off just by asking you both to introduce your books in a few lines. Ashley Tate, may I start with you?
Sure. 27 Minutes is my debut thriller. It's about what happens when the secrets in a small town become impossible to keep buried. It takes place in West Wilmer, a small claustrophobic town that's never really been able to move on from the car accident that killed the town's golden girl, Phoebe Dean. The story opens 10 years later, in the couple of days leading up to the memorial that is being held in her honor. And the people most affected by the accident, Grant and Becca, who were in the car, and June, whose brother Wyatt left the same night and has mysteriously returned, they really start to unravel the closer that we get to the memorial. And eventually, the truth of what really happened that night will come out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Ashley Elston, could I ask you to do the same, please?
Yes. Okay. So my adult debut thriller is First Lie Wins. It's about a woman who has worked for her mysterious employer under various aliases for the last 10 years. But when past mistakes begin to catch up with her, she realizes that there's more at stake than she originally thought. It was really fun to write. I love a good con artist story, and I love the idea of someone being sort of morally gray, but you still kind of want to root for them. So because there's some redeeming qualities there as well. And it was set in the South. It was fun to sort of give those readers glimpses of different areas around here as you sort of get through, how she got to where she is and sort of, what set her on this path. And so it's just kind of a fun, hopefully kind of twisty con artist book.
Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant pictures, both of you. Thank you. And you both have such powerful, distinctive hooks at the heart of your novels. 27 Minutes centres around the ripple effect of one fatal decision, and First Lie Wins about a woman who lives in the grey, but whose past is finally catching up with her. Would you mind just telling us a bit more about those hooks and how you came up with them? Ashley Elston, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, so one of my favorite shows, it's an older show, was Alias. And what I loved about that was, which she would take on these different identities, and she, every episode was sort of, go get the bad guy, but it would be just not your typical, to me, sort of job. And that's kind of what I always loved about that. And so when I started writing this book, I had this idea for this book. I just, I thought, well, I want to kind of get out of what you think of when you think of a con job. And, I wanted to sort of shake it up and, maybe she's, looking for more than just, money or information, which some of that is in the book as well. But, I kind of hit on, college football and, all of the dark sides of that sometimes. And it was just really fun to sort of, think about how I could sort of stretch that world a little bit. And then, and then to have her still likable, I think was kind of a fun challenge. And then, maybe the love interest, maybe he's good, maybe he's not, you know, and how everybody's sort of in the gray in some way. It's not always black, it's not always white. I think there's always some gray there. And so I just sort of, I don't know, kind of ran with that idea. And honestly, just, I don't know, it just kind of wove itself together in a way that I don't know, I rewrote the ending like 7 times, honestly, to get it right. So, you know, I don't know, it was fun to write.
Well, you absolutely did get it right. And I think it's such an interesting idea. Thank you. And Ashley Tate, how about you?
Yeah, so the hook is the night of the accident. Why did it take Grant Dean 27 minutes to call for help when, if he had called earlier, his sister might still be alive? And you touched on it, on this ripple effect that one decision can have. And that's what I wanted to explore. You know, that destabilizing feeling of having your entire life changed in an instant, of how it feels to have the rug pulled out from under you, whether that's losing someone you love or really making a terrible, terrible choice, making a horrible decision, and then having to live with the consequences of that forever. How one momentous event can really change the core of who someone is, whether it was intended or not, or whether you were passive or active in this event. I wanted to explore the weight of grief and regret and how that can change someone. And then the hook itself, the 27 minutes, which is a really short period of time for, you know, so many lives to be altered. I want the reader to constantly be drawn back to that and asking why did this happen? What made him wait to call for help?
Brilliant. And it just underpins everything, isn't it? And I think we all fear making that kind of choice. Thank you. So my final question is a big one. It's about grief. I think it's an important theme in both your books, but in very different ways. And I'd love to hear from you on how loss and fear of loss manifests in and motivates your characters. Ashley Elston, let's start with you.
So, you know, my main character sort of gets her start on this sort of life of crime, you know, because of, you know, before her mother dies, but it is sort of, she puts on the path because she needs some money and she needs it quickly. And she probably, the only way to get that is through nefarious means. But, and what do you do for grief? And, you know, what are you willing to sacrifice, or what are you willing to sort of, you know, trade on what your, you know, the good versus the evil, and, you know, where is that balance when you really, you know, when it becomes important to, you know, you need money. So what am I going to do for that? And then I thought it was very interesting, you know, so, you know, definitely grief, you know, sort of gives her the start to this and drives her. But then I thought it was very interesting that, you know, what happens when you kind of are in this sort of life of crime, but then find that you're really good at it and that you really kind of like it. And then, so when does it become like, okay, well, this started out, you know, as a means to an end for good cause, but now I'm just sort of really in it and I'm good at it and I like it. I don't know. And the grief still is a very strong part of it, because that's, you know, she's not only lost her mother, but she's, you know, that whole sense of identity. And, you know, are you really who you think you are if you can't be your true self? And anyway, it was just sort of fun to play with a lot of those concepts.
Yeah, that's really interesting and a really sort of powerful way of looking at it. Thank you. And Ashley Tate, could you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. I wrote 27 minutes after losing my mother, so it was really cathartic. It was a very cathartic experience, but clearly my book deals very heavily with grief. And I tried to write about how stuck it can feel, because it never really goes away, right? It kind of ebbs and flows, and it can kind of creep up on you out of nowhere. And I wanted to explore that. And I think all 4 of my main characters are very driven by grief and loss, and they are all very stuck, almost stagnant, even in their lives, even though it's been 10 years. And they might be grieving different things. I mean, June's grieving the loss of her mother, but also family life that she had before Wyatt left, and Grant is very much grieving his sister, but also the dreams that they had that kind of never came about. And Becca, I'd say, is grieving life that she had before this accident. It's just such a stuck feeling, right? And so I wanted to write about that, how they're kind of frozen in their lives until, of course, Wyatt comes back and kind of sets off this chain of events that allows them to become unstuck.
Yeah, thank you. I think that image of them being stuck and Wyatt as a catalyst is bang on. It's incredibly poignant. Thank you so much. I think that's all our questions. So I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for joining us. I've really enjoyed talking to you both, and I just can't wait for 27 Minutes and First Low Winds to publish early next year. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was super fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome to Headliners and welcome to our lovely authors Lesley McDowell, author of Claremont, and Janina Matthewson, author of The Horses. So thank you very much for taking the time to be here and telling our readers what they have to get excited about for your lovely, incredible, one-of-a-kind books, which are coming out next year. So I thought to start with, maybe you could just give us a quick introduction to your books. Janina, would you like to start perhaps with The Horses?
Sure. The Horses is a sort of potentially post-apocalyptic, very small community trying to live alone for the first time after having been cut off from the rest of the world for reasons that they don't necessarily understand, and just their progress over the year following that event through the eyes of one of the people on the island.
It's such an incredible book. And Lesley, perhaps you could give us a little bit of an introduction into Claremont as well.
Yes, it's about Claire Claremont, who's probably best known as the stepsister of Mary Shelley and the lover of Byron, and she was the mother to Byron's child, Allegra. But there's a lot more to her than that. She lived in Russia for 10 years. She lived independently in Paris. And she's immortalized in the Aspern Papers by Henry James at the end of her life when she's an old lady living in Florence. So she lived a big life, and it's kind of been forgotten about, really. She's the one who's really on the margins of that group.
It's a really beautiful story, and you're right that she's definitely a character on the margins, and your book really does an incredible job of bringing her to the fore, which is so exciting. Lesley, I'd like to start with you in terms of the inspiration behind Claire and her story. You know, your book obviously has fairly equal historical and literary sources that you can draw on. So, you know, including Claire's letters and journals and stuff like that to create this very dramatic canvas. So what was the process like for pulling that all together?
It's quite interesting because I think as a historical novelist, you want to look for the gaps in the life, the places where you can invent things. And Claire was a big letter writer, so there's a lot of letters and they're brilliant, and she also kept journals as well, so trying to find the spaces in between there is actually quite tricky. But it's interesting that the one of the big moments that's really sort of immortalized in literary history, of course, is the night at the Villa Diodati, the ghost storytelling night when Mary really comes up with Frankenstein. And I think it's really interesting that neither Mary nor Claire kept their journals from that time. They both wrote journals, but they destroyed them. So we don't really have a woman's take on what that night was actually like. Mary writes about it in years later in a foreword to Frankenstein, but it's a long time after the event. So that gives you a little bit of room for maneuver, I think. When it comes to the letters, it's really interesting when you look at her letters to Byron when she's only 18 and she's trying to seduce him and she's chasing after him. And there's a performative aspect to the letters. And that's one of the things that you start to realize, that letters aren't necessarily a reflection of that individual's true personality. And so the historical fiction starts to become about getting underneath that person and find out who they really are and getting to the essence of them. So there was a lot of potential there, I felt, with Claire to really try and get to who the essence of her was, actually.
Definitely. And Janina, there's a sort of, I don't want to spoil it, but there's obviously one source that you really do pull on with this book. So what was the process in terms of pulling out that larger world from that source? Are you happy to share what that source is?
Totally, yeah. I think it's The Horses by Edward Muir, which is a poem he wrote in 1956. It's definitely an inspiration point. The book isn't an adaptation of the poem. The poem is very concerned with, it's 1956, so it's 11 years after the nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it's very much a response to the awareness of the threat of nuclear war, essentially, the idea that the world could be destroyed in a matter of days. And that becomes less important in the book. I think the book becomes more about a community living in this silence, cut off from everyone else. The idea that the radios have run silent and there's no connection anymore with anything else. They can't find out the details of what's happened. They don't know what the dangers are to themselves. So it's more pulling from that isolation aspect of the poem, I think, and what that does to people over time.
Absolutely. And characters are obviously right at the heart of that, right? They're the sort of beating heart of both of these stories. But Janina, with you, in terms of Sarah, of this main character, how did you create her? She's not a character that lives in the poem necessarily.
Yeah, no, so Sarah, the protagonist, is a 19-year-old who was on the point of leaving this very small, isolated village and, striking out on her own in the wider world. And she has that future taken from her. So it's telling the story from her point of view is sort of about looking at what is lost when the world around you changes irrevocably, and what that means for you, and the idea that even when big things happen, and I think this is something that everyone sort of learned over the past few years, if they hadn't already, that big catastrophes, they don't overwrite the small things about life. The small things that matter on an individual level are still there, and there's a certain guilt, I think, associated with that, when you can't stop yourself from caring so much about something that only affects you, in spite of the fact that you're in the middle of something much, much bigger. So it becomes a much more personal journey in the middle of a catastrophic, wide-ranging tragedy,
isn't it? The beauty of the personal and the catastrophe, yeah. And Leslie, with Claire's personality, how did you feel like fleshing her out as a character, given there's quite a lot that already exists in her own voice, and you're breathing sort of, like vibrancy into that as well with your own writing?
I think for me, it was really about focusing on these different periods in her life. I mean, the ones that felt to me to be so crucial. So you've got this, I look at 1816 when she's 18 years old and pregnant by Byron, and she's young and reckless and bold and full of life and all the rest of it. And then the other section, the other time period I look at is 1825 when she's in Russia. So it's almost 10 years later, and she's experienced an enormous amount of loss. I mean, Shelley has died, Byron has died. I don't want to say any more to give more of it away, but she's somebody who's been through a great deal. So she's a changed person by this point. She's still full of life. She's still somebody tackling a difficult time for women, all of those kinds of things. But she really has suffered in a way that she obviously hadn't at the age of 18. And the third era that I look at in Paris, she's a mature woman at this point. She's experienced. She's more reconciled to certain things, but there's also still stuff that's coming up that she's really got to sort of try and deal with. So she's got her independence, but that's come at a cost. And she's also looking to the future. What does she do next? Where does she go? So it felt like those were sort of like three sort of key moments that really reflected a change in her personality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's our time, but I just want to say a massive thank you to both of you, Janina and Leslie. And personally, I'm so excited for readers to get their hands on these books. They're absolutely brilliant and beautiful. And thank you again for taking time to speak to us. And I hope all of you out there enjoy reading them as much as I did.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen Doyle, Fiction Publishing Director at Headline, and I'm thrilled to be here with three of our amazing authors. I'd like to introduce you to Matt Cain, Freya North, and Matt Coyne. Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to be here.
Can I start by asking each of you to give us a brief introduction to your book in just a few sentences? I'm going to start by coming to you, Matt Coyne.
Oh, great. My book is called Frank and Red, and it's the story of a miserable old fella called Frank, who is an agoraphobic recluse, and has been since the death of his wife a couple of years earlier, and is completely cut off from the outside world, and is estranged from his family and his friends. And then one day a little boy called Red moves in next door and peers over the fence. And so begins an odd friendship, really, that may well turn out to be life-changing and redemptive, and warm a cold, dead heart. So yeah, that's Frank and Red.
Thank you, Matt. And Freya, can I come to you next?
Yes, well, The Unfinished Business of Edie Brown is the title of my novel. It's my 16th novel. And it features a woman who is travelling from the northwest back to the south, to the small town in which she grew up for a funeral. And the journey there is so much more than a logistical one, because it inspires her to think back to her childhood and also to her youth, and to the one profound event that's shaped the person that she's become and could well affect her future if she lets it. I think that's what my book's about.
Thank you, Freya. Matt Cain.
My book is called One Love. It was very much inspired by David Nicholls' One Day. It is about a 20-year friendship and the blurred boundaries when it sometimes tips over, the feelings become more romantic. It's about two friends who meet at Manchester University, and 20 years later, to celebrate the anniversary of their friendship, they go back to the city for the 4-day Manchester Pride Festival. And over the course of that weekend, their relationship comes to a head. It all unravels in ways neither of them could have predicted, because one of them has been secretly in love with the other for the whole 20 years.
Thanks, Matt. So I'd like to talk a little bit about inspiration and intention now. So Matt Cain, coming to you first, where did this story come from, and what specific research did you do for the book?
I had always loved David Nicholls' One Day, and I loved all those films and TV shows about will they or won't they, should they be friends, should they actually be together? And the truth is, with a straight man and a straight woman, it's very, very unusual to have a close friendship, particularly into your 30s and 40s. At university, less so. It doesn't really happen. It separates off quite into clearly marked lanes, friendship, relationship. Whereas with gay men, there's much more potential for blurred boundaries. And I thought, I could explore this. I also thought you know, I like to celebrate all the progress we've made as a society in terms of acceptance of gay people like me. Because when I was growing up in the 80s, I literally never imagined things could be as good as they are now, that I'd be married to a man, writing books about gays and being widely celebrated for it. But it strikes me that in that 20-year period between 2002, when Will Young won Pop Idol, I like to get my pop culture references in because they're important, right through to that 20-year period, so much changed then. And I could tell that story through these individual characters. And in terms of, because I like to pack a punch by reminding people what it used to be like and make people feel good about their role in making things better. And in terms of research, very briefly, I didn't need to do much because I like to write from the heart and from personal experience. I think I'm best when I do that. And a lot of the details of the characters' lives in the story have changed, but all the emotions and the character progressions I felt. So I didn't really have to do much research, although I did go to Manchester Pride 3 years running and with a little notebook and making videos all the time and taking pictures of everything in between getting drunk with friends. And
what is sacrifice?
so, yeah, that was my research.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. And Freya, your novel is a real love letter to youth. What inspired Edie's journey and what research did you do in writing it?
Well, I suppose I wanted to explore sympathetically that kind of surliness almost that we're helpless not to feel when we're about to leave home and we're on the cusp between being children and being young adults, and the place where we've grown up starts to sort of feel like an itchy jumper that's a little bit too tight. And it's kind of a strange limbo land when, you know, emotions are surging. We're not quite sure of our place in the world. We feel powerful, but we also feel insecure. We feel we know everything, but then, you know, situations slap us in the face when we realize that actually, you know, we're pretty much floundering. But in terms of research, well, a lot of research was done up in my loft, digging around boxes and finding all my old letters. You know, this was the day of first post and second post, when you would write to your friends saying, can you phone me on Friday at 7 p.m? And you'd wait by a phone box, hoping that that call would come in. You know, the days before WhatsApp, I've still got all these little notebooks that I put outside my door that people would, you know, write me messages where I was to be, where they were going to be. But perhaps the most beautiful part of research that I did was that I wrote a letter to the house in which I'd lived in Hathersage Road in Manchester. And I wrote, you know, dear Hathersage Road, I lived here many years ago. And if it's possible, I'd love to come back. And blow me, it was still a student house. And I walked up to that blue front door opposite the Victoria Baths, and I knocked on the door, and these fresh-faced, smiley students opened up, and I went back in, and they kept me there for 2.5 hours because they were as keen to hear about the history of the house as I was keen to get back up that staircase and open my bedroom door and go back into the bedroom that had just been so important and, you know, had been my sanctuary at such a fundamental part of my life. And it was really, really moving to physically tread memory lane. You know, all the swirly carpet had gone. It now has central heating instead of the gas fires that burnt my eyelashes off. And these students and I have become great chums, and we've got our own WhatsApp group. They come to stay with me. I've been up to watch them perform. They're all drama students. So that was an extraordinary privilege. I've always felt that being an author, research is a real perk of your career. It can take you into worlds that you are curious about, because to be an author, you have to be really nosy. But, you know, it's always a privilege when your research quite literally opens doors for you.
I love that you did that. Thank you. And Matt Coyne, what inspired the unlikely friendship between Frank and Red? And what did you do to get into the heads of your characters?
Well, all my books so far, I've done 2 non-fiction books with Headline as well, and they were both inspired by parenting my little boy. And this is exactly the same, really. He's my muse, really. Bless him. He was 6 years old himself when I was writing this. He's 7 now. So sort of trying to find the voice of Red wasn't very difficult, especially during the holidays. He never shuts up. So it was quite, I didn't really need to find that voice. It was constantly in my ear. And finding the voice for Frank was fairly easy as well, because he's just a mix of my dad and my granddad, and who were just the loveliest fellas, God rest their souls, but could be such grumpy buggers as well. And I think finding Frank's voice was fairly straightforward as well. Yeah, I think the seed of the idea though came from a friend of mine visits old people's homes at Christmas. He visits and they serve lunch and they play bingo and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And one year he asked me to go, and I'm very much a fan of sort of civic responsibility and community, and that, right up to the point when I actually have to do something. That's when I'm kind of out normally. But I went along, and there should be a story about how I discovered something amazing. Actually, I was bored out of my mind when I was there, and I realised it's sort of a year later was when I took Charlie with me. He was 4, and it was a completely different experience. And I realised that the reason I was bored is because I was being boring, really. And Charlie went along, and the conversations that he had with people there were completely different to the ones I was asking stock questions that you ask of people that you generally ask who are elderly, and they were asking stock questions of what do you do for a living and stuff like that. Charlie walked straight in and he's like, why have you got that bandage on? And the fella's like, well, I was bitten by a shark, I think he said, or something. So these interactions that they had were much more natural and much better, and they had a relationship that seemed to spark in a way that because we speak to kids and the elderly in similar ways, we don't seem to get. And I think the seed of the idea was probably came from that. Yeah. And just listening to Charlie every day as well. There's literal conversations in Frank and Red that are just lifted from my day. There's a conversation in there between Red and his mum about what would win in a fight, a shark or a gorilla in a suit of armour. And that's just a conversation that I just had this morning. Just lifted it up.
They're important questions to answer.
Absolutely right. So in terms of research, I just nicked everything off Charlie and then put it on the page, really. So it's cheating.
That's great. Right, I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Freya, Matt and Matt. Read all of their books. They're fantastic. And see you soon.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bryony Gordon, author of Mad Woman, which publishes in February 2024. It's a follow-up to Mad Girl, the book that I wrote in 2016, which was all about my experiences with mental illness, predominantly obsessive compulsive disorder. Mad Woman deals with everything that's happened since. Hormones, getting sober, binge eating, the madness of the pandemic, but most of all, I feel like Mad Woman questions our concept of madness and whether those of us dubbed mad are actually the most sane people of all. I hope that you'll enjoy it, get something from it. Most of all, I hope that it will connect with people in the same way that Mad Girl did, and in the same way that Mad Girl changed my life and continues to help me on a daily basis.
Hi, I'm Ellen Atlanta, author of Pixel Flesh, publishing in May 2024. Pixel Flesh is all about digital beauty culture and its impact on young women. From Love Island to lip filler, blackfishing to the beauty tax, and the way we augment our bodies online and off with tweakments, cosmetic surgery, photo editing apps, AR face filters, and everything in between. Pixel Flesh tells the stories of multiple women across multiple countries and they share their experiences with an aim to unmask the absurdities of the dystopia that we find ourselves living in under beauty culture today. Pixel Flesh is Black Mirror meets the beauty myth for the digital generation. It's a rallying cry, it's a refusal to suffer in silence, and it's an account of what it feels like to exist as a young woman today.
Yo quiero escribir mi historia porque ahora en el mundo estamos enfrentando una pandemia, el crisis cambio climático, la extinción de especies. Y por toda mi vida el mundo ha venido saqueando de nuestras tierras y no ha tenido el coraje o el respeto para conocernos a nosotros, los pueblos indígenas.
No está en venta.
Nemonte is as fierce as a jaguar and her heart is as big as the entire Amazon rainforest. I know because she's my partner and I've been living out here with her people for the last 7 years. We have a young daughter and a child on the way. Together we've walked her ancestral lands and battled against oil companies, miners, loggers, and now it's time to tell her story to the entire world. Mostly what I'm going to be doing is listening to a story that goes back thousands of years and has the power to protect the Amazon for thousands of years to come.
Entonces yo voy a escribir mi libro para contar al mundo que nosotros estamos aquí, los pueblos indígenas, aunque nos han venido invadiendo y seguimos en pie. Y decirles que la tierra no espera que la salve, espera que la respete y nosotros como pueblos indígenas esperamos lo mismo.
Hello everyone, my name's Marianne. I am one of the editors at Tinder Press and I'm here with my author Sarah Marsh to talk about her wonderful novel, A Sign of Her Own. A Sign of Her Own is a historical novel set between London and Boston in the late 19th century. It centres around a young deaf woman named Ellen Locke. When we first encounter her, she's in the grip of a dilemma. Sarah, I love the way you talk about the book. Would you mind describing it in your own terms?
Yes, sure. So Ellen Locke is living in London. She's about to be married when she receives a visit from her former teacher, Alexander Graham Bell, and he asks for her help because he's being challenged over the right to the telephone patent. But Ellen has her own story to tell about how he had betrayed her, and so she must decide whether to take a stand against him.
So when I first read your novel, I found it almost unbelievable that I knew nothing about the role of the deaf community in the invention of the telephone. How did you come across this story and when did you realise you were going to write a novel about it?
It was about 10 years ago. I grew up deaf myself and I had just started learning British Sign Language as an adult. So I was reading a lot about deaf history and deaf culture. I read a book about American and French deaf history, which included a chapter about Bell, focusing not on his role as an inventor, but as an educator, specifically a teacher of the deaf who promoted the value of speech over sign language. And as I read more, I found a lot of information about Bell, but nothing really from a perspective of his deaf pupils. And it was in researching them that I came to the character of Ellen Locke as someone who might tell the story differently.
So talk to us about Ellen as a narrator. Ellen's a deaf narrator, and the novel is such a powerful exploration of how it feels to navigate a hearing world as a deaf person. What challenges and what opportunities did having a deaf narrator present?
She's deaf and she's a woman in Victorian society, so I did have to think very carefully about the kind of agency that she might or might not have in confronting the prejudices and expectations that hearing people around her had. But she is quite a passionate and headstrong character, which I think certainly helped with that. I also had to think about the dialogue and communication. So she communicates through some speech, lip reading, notebook, and also sign language. So I wanted to capture those different modes of communication, but also convey how it feels to as a deaf person when communication so frequently breaks down. But I hope that the end result is a perspective that readers might not have encountered in fiction before.
Absolutely. Could you tell us a little bit more about Frank? Everyone who reads the novel really falls in love with him, and I can tell you really enjoyed writing him. What do you think he brings to the book, and what do you hope readers' reactions to him will be?
So Frank is a central character in the book. I think Ellen is very torn between him and Belle and the different futures that they promise. Frank is deaf, but unlike Ellen, he's born deaf. Into a deaf family, he was raised in the deaf community, and he has sign language as his first language. So I think the novel, through Ellen's relationship with Frank, explores the connections that deaf people made with each other in the 19th century against the backdrop of the telephone and the connections that Belle was hoping to forge with that. I hope that readers appreciate the dilemmas that Frank faces in the story, but also the variety of deaf experience through these different characters, and also the impact that Belle's ideas about sign language had on the deaf community.
Thank you. That's such a fascinating introduction to the novel. Thank you for being here tonight, Sarah, and thank you everyone for listening.
Hi everyone, I'm Frankie Edwards, Editorial Director at Headline Publishing Group, and I'm joined by two of the most exciting and original authors writing today, Moses Mackenzie and Bobby Palmer. Hello both, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, thanks for having us.
Both Bobby and Moses have new books coming out in spring 2024, so let's get straight into talking about them. Moses, I'd like to come to you first. Please would you give us a brief introduction to your new novel, Fast by the Horns?
Yeah, so Fast by the Horns is set in Bristol in 1980 in a tight-knit Rastafari community of St. Paul's. And it follows a 14-year-old boy called Jabari, who's proud of his position as the son of the community leader. And it's about the relationship between the father and the son, and the idea of, or the Rastafari idea of repatriation, going back home to Africa. And it kind of explores the need, or perhaps from some of the community's perspective, the idealism of that particular idea or that principle. And yeah, it's about him navigating that alongside the tension of the sus laws and fighting against that. It's you could call it historical fiction in the sense that there was the St. Paul's riots in 1980, which is kind of the setting or the background, the political background of the novel, and of the father and son's relationship is set during that time. So yeah, it's about Jabari looking for an opportunity to exercise either justice or revenge whilst trying to navigate his relationship with his father, who's quite a far off, redoubtable figure in his life.
Thanks, Moses. Bobby, would you please tell us a bit about Small Hours?
Yeah. So Small Hours is also a book about a father and a son. It's about a young man called Jack whose life is his work. Then one day, everything he thinks he knows basically unravels. So he loses his job, and he gets a call from his sister saying that his mum's gone missing. So that sends him back to the countryside where he grew up for the first time in years, and to his dad, who he hasn't spoken to since he left. And the book's really about their relationship, about them coming back together, and also, as weird as it sounds, about a strange little fox who won't leave either of them alone.
Thanks, Bobby. So both of these books are second novels, following on from successful debuts. Coming to you first again, Moses, I would love to know how you found writing book 2 and whether the process felt different to your first novel, An Olive Grove and Ends.
Yeah, I think the process was very different. I think speaking honestly, I think when I had the idea for the second book and I signed the 2-book contract, I think I wasn't really aware or fully aware how much, or the fact that I was obligated to write what I had sold with just a line or log line. So yeah, so when it came time to actually write it, there was other things that I wanted to write more so. So I think what I found interesting or challenging, both things, over the past years, having to commit to an idea that was essentially a year and a half old, as someone who was a year and a half older. So I remember I first wrote the book. So I first wrote like 50,000 words or so, or 60,000 words in a week, because I was trying to compete with Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote The Rise of Watching God in like a week or a weekend or something like that. It's crazy. And then I just didn't touch it for ages while I was working on Olive Grove and Ends. And then when I came back to it, I basically scrapped those 50,000 words and started again. I started again a few times, all while trying to plan my next book and then write other things at the same time. So I think it was a matter of writing this book was interesting because I had so many things going on in my mind in terms of other stories that I knew were also attainable, or their publication or whatever was attainable. Whereas when in the first book, I was just solely writing that book and had nothing else in my mind. So yeah, I think I'd say this is the first book I wrote as a writer or as a novelist in terms of a job.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way to put it. Thank you. What about you, Bobby? How did the experience of writing a second novel compare to Isaac and the Egg?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think when you write a first book, you don't really realize at the time, but you kind of have almost the privilege of like writing almost for yourself. Like you don't yet have a readership who sort of expects something from you. So I wrote Isaac and the Egg during lockdown, so I was basically not in touch with the outside world at all, and it was a really nice writing experience. Strangely, it was quite immersive. And then when it came to writing Small Hours, it was challenging. It was difficult because I think you're thinking, people who liked Isaac and the Egg kind of want the same thing again, but also something totally different, and you have to walk that tightrope. So you're thinking like, will the people who like the first book like this? Will I find new readers with this? And I think all you can really do as a writer is follow your gut. You just know when a story is working, when a story wants to be told. So it was challenging, it was difficult along the way, and it did take a long time. But I guess I just followed my gut, and this is the story that came out, and it's ended up being a book that's really special to me.
Thanks, Bobby. What made you choose to write about 1980s Bristol, and specifically 80s Bristol?
Yeah, so I think these first two books of mine are most likely, I'm not going to say never, but most likely the last time I'll write about Bristol. Because I don't have much to say about Bristol afterwards. But yeah, so the two areas that have impacted me most in life are the areas of Easton and St. Paul's. The first book was set in Easton, the second book was set in St. Paul's. That's why I can't imagine writing something else, because I've completed Bristol, but or my Bristol at least. But yeah, it's because of the impact that the previous generation had on this generation, as is always the case, and the issues that I write about, the themes I write about, such as displacement, or these families that have complicated relationships with one another in an Olive Grove and Ends. Like I said, it's directly because of the events that happen in Fast by the Horns. And even if there's no familial link between the characters may not have ever known each other, the children may have passed each other in the street, but that doesn't matter. What they went through, again, fighting against the sus laws or the Rastafari religion or movement, has a direct influence on the culture of the people in Olive Grove and Ends, and the culture of the people in the present, the culture of myself.
Thank you for that. Bobby, Small Hours opens in the city, but as the book moves on, the setting becomes gradually wilder. To you, what is the significance of nature and the natural world in Small Hours?
So it's quite it's a probably more of a personal book for me than Isaac and the Egg, because I wrote it around the time I moved out of London, and it was very much coloured by COVID, and it really explores themes like burnout and the kind of anxious, restless lives we can lead in the modern world. But I also didn't want it to be a book that was like, oh, move out of the city, everyone should move to the countryside, because that's not how I feel. Like, I love London. I really miss London. It's kind of a love letter to London as much as it is to the wild. And that's why, you never really get place names in the book. You have the city and the country and the wild. It could be any city, it could be any part of the country. I just wanted it to be a book about how fast paced we can move nowadays, and how that means we don't stop and look around. And for that reason, the nature of the city plays a massive part. That's sort of like that other world that exists beneath the world that we move about in every single day. And that's why the idea of the fox becomes so integral to the book, because it's this creature that exists on the boundary between the two, between the old natural world and the modern human world, as well as the boundary between the city and the country, basically.
That's nice.
It's really nice. That's a really nice note to end on. Bobby, Moses, thank you both so much. I've really loved hearing about what's coming next for both of you, following brilliant debut novels, and can't wait for readers to get their hands on both these books in the spring. So thanks so much, and bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And there we have it. We really hope you've enjoyed this whistle-stop tour through some of our books publishing in early 2024. It's such an exciting list, and I hope there's something in there for every reader. We'd love to hear what you thought, so do let us know on Twitter and Instagram with #headliners, tagging @HeadlinePG on Twitter and @HeadlineBooks on Instagram. Do also give our authors a follow and let them know what you thought too. I know they would hugely appreciate it. We'll also have our competitions running for a little while longer on our social media platforms, so do please keep an eye out on that and get involved if you want to win a goodie box too. Lastly, if you want to get your hands on some of the books featured tonight early, your best bet is to head to our NetGalley page, where a lot of these books are now available to request. So do get an account on there and pop your requests in, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can over the coming weeks. Other than that, all that remains is for me to say thank you to our brilliant authors and editors for taking the time out this evening, and to all of you for coming along and getting stuck into engaging with us. We're really excited about these books coming up, and we hope that after this evening, you guys are too. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.